classic all-time film. This is Major League, 1989.
Yeah. I talked earlier about people having to learn how to play baseball. Tom Berenger, Wesley Snipes, most of that cast had to have 6 weeks of training on how to glove the ball, how to throw the ball, had to hit the ball. Two guys didn't. Corbin Bernsen, who played third base, who played Dorn, and Charlie Sheen. I remember Charlie Sheen in high school in L.A. Massive pitchers. He could have gone and played college ball, but of course he got into acting. So, classic film. To me, of my list, it's a comedy in there about a team, the Cleveland Indians that stink, and the owner, gorgeous lady, I forgot what the actress's name. If she loses enough games, she can move the team to Florida or something like that, and they end up winning enough games. The guy who played the manager, he's in a million things with that raspy voice. Fun movie, just a lot of fun. It's what's the word I'm looking for? It's pretty much a script that foreshadows a lot, but it works. Does that make sense? It works.
Yeah, and James Gammon was the guy who played Lou Brown, the manager, and I believe it's Margaret Whitten who played Rachel Phelps. I think that's the owner that you're talking about. The former. If I remember right, I think she was a cocktail girl at a casino or something that the old owner married, and then he dies. And the whole thing is she wants to make the film, the team, she wants to make the team as bad as possible to move to Miami so she can get sunlight.
Right.
If I remember right. She is one of the great foils in baseball movie history for sure. Absolutely. Sure. And talk a little bit more about seeing Charlie Sheen playing baseball in high school. You actually got that up front.
He phenomenal fastball, phenomenal curveball. Great kid. I mean, we all grew up in that part of LA, and he's a little younger than I am, but he was a stud, and his brother was a stud wrestler. Emilio was a stud wrestler, and they used that in the movie Breakfast Club. They was a wrestler, but Emilio Estevez is a little shorter. Charlie Sheen had command, and so he had little technical training when he went into it. And that's one thing I remember when they're doing the making of the film, and I saw it on VH1. And Corbin Bernsen must have played somewhere in his life, because the rest of the cast, you would think Wesley Snipes, Tom Berenger, the guy that played the Dennis Haysbert, who's now in all
the president.
They all had to learn how to play baseball. I get it. If you look like you don't know how to stand right, it comes out on film. If you don't go for the ball, and I think it's great the way they put that whole thing together. I don't know, you know better than I do who wrote and directed it, because you're Dragon movie guy. But I do know that the formula of making a team for them to root for, because you're going up against the owner, and Bob Uecker is great. He's an old Milwaukee Brewers owner. Bob Uecker is great. He's great in the Miller Lite commercials. I mean, that's what he stands out as, and he's great as an announcer in the team. He's always drinking down a Jack Daniels bottle. It's a comedy. It's a comedy, and it's about a bunch of guys that lose and they finally win.
And did you actually? He's a little bit younger than you are. Did you actually face off versus Charlie Sheen? Get the batter box against him?
No, I did not face off against him. I didn't want to, but I just know by living in Los Angeles and just knowing his story, you know his story now, that he's a phenomenal baseball player, and he used it. He was able to use it in the movie.
And you can really see that too. The wild thing in Wild Thing in Ricky Vaughn is definitely all Charlie Sheen. And this was written and directed by David Ward, by the way. Yeah. Not familiar with his other work, but he did write and direct Major League. And you're right too, also about Bob Uecker. And for anyone old enough to remember Mr. Belvedere, Bob Uecker was the classic sitcom dad in an 80s sitcom, who was he's Bob Uecker. It's, there's a reason why we still say just a bit outside. That's Bob Uecker. That is pure Bob Uecker. And I know lots of people, he does have a colorful reputation at best in real life. Well earned. Definitely influenced by, I'm sure, his success and his time. And he actually was a real life ball player at one point too. that made the big show for
And
a minuscule amount of time. But
the Milwaukee Brewers for years. I think he retired, but he's a Milwaukee Brewers play-by-play announcer, and he got the fame by doing the Miller Lite commercials like John Madden. That Miller Lite commercial he does, where he goes, "Look at these seats that I got," and he's sitting in the top row of the stadium. You hear him scream, "He missed a tag!" I mean, I laughed every time I saw that. Go on YouTube and look at Bob Uecker's Miller Lite commercials, and you'll laugh your ass off.
And he did those Miller Lite commercials for years and years and years. And yeah, they would replay a lot of them, but he would come out with new ones, and you could tell the hairlines receding a little bit, the paunches coming up a little bit, but he filmed so many of those year after year after year, and they were always great, great pieces of advertising and fun as well. So that's why they get replayed all the time. Major League, 1989, Charlie Sheen, another baseball movie from Charlie Sheen, but one of the all-time great baseball comedies. That's all this is. This is a good time. It is an all-star cast. It is Corbin Bernsen. It is Wesley Snipes before he was Wesley Snipes and he was Willie Mays Hayes. This is the stripper who inherits the team, and the team rallies together to give her a giant middle finger with a naked picture of her as a showgirl, and they remove a single piece of clothing, or a single piece of her piece of clothing from this big cardboard cutout every time they win a game. And by the end, of course, the big cardboard cutout is basically completely naked in a PG-13 sense. This is James Gammon, one of the great, the great hacked voice, kind of grizzly. I can't even do his voice without trying to lose my voice. One of the great baritone voiced actors of his era, sadly gone before his time, but a great performance as Lou, the manager, the guy who's trying to flip off the owner, who everyone is able to rally around against the owner. It is the working man. It is sort of the Bad News Bears, but Major League Baseball. It is the people that shouldn't be there that they purposely invite because they think they're bad baseball players and they want to not be accused of moving the team. All of that, they still come together. They still make a run. All of that, and all the great comedy too. And I love the credit card commercial they do in there, the American Express commercial. They're still doing those American Express commercials like that nowadays. A great case of product placement in movies, but it's a funny scene. Yes, it's product placement, but that's part of the fun of that scene in that film, and it's one that's still it's still in commercials today. So all of that, Major League, my number 2 film. More thoughts on Major League? You already have it on your list.
One of the we talk about in the bar business, which I'm in. We talk about this one scene. So there's a scene where Corbin Bernsen's wife is watching these guys celebrating a win, and he's making out with some girl in the background while in the locker room. So she knew that Charlie Sheen had a contentious relationship with Corbin Bernsen. And he's in a bar drinking, and she walks up to Charlie Sheen, and she stands behind him. This is Corbin Bernsen's wife, played by, his name is Dorn, and she says to Charlie Sheen, I don't know verbatim, but it's sort of like, "You're the sexiest, most handsome, beautiful man I've ever seen in my life." He looks at the bartender and goes, "Check." So Dorn finds out that Charlie Sheen, has an affair with his wife, and it's another little, spoiler, but it was just great. It's great dialogue in the film. It's interesting, Sheen talked about what a great relationship and friendship he had with Tom Berenger, and I just thought about this. I forgot that they were in Platoon together 2 years earlier. That film came out in what, 88? When did
this
Platoon
came out in 88 or 89? Platoon came out in 86.
Yeah, so they had a working relationship, and they were rivals in that big time. And I everything about Major League, you hit it the nail on the head, Dragon Movie Guy. It's a great comedy, formulaic, but it worked because it was dialogue, and you ended up rooting for these guys. And I just thought it was great watching the making of it on the VH1 special. All these guys had to go through 6 weeks of training, except we talked about Corbin Bernsen had some baseball in him, and Charlie Sheen. If he would have stayed with it, who knows? He might not have been 3 men. What was the show he did? What's the sitcom?
2.5 Men.
2.5 Men. I have half his shirts.
Well, and it's funny you bring up the you bring up Ricky Wild Thing Vaughn inadvertently sleeping with Dorn's wife. I love the payoff of that scene at the very end of the film, where they come together, they win the big game. There's all that tension between Dorn and Vaughn throughout the entire rest of the film. And while they're celebrating, Dorn comes up to Vaughn, punches him in the face, and then gives him a hug. And it's a minor subplot, but the tension is there the entire film. But it's just the comedic timing of resolving that tension and yet celebrating and getting even at the same time without much dialogue, because it's the middle of they're celebrating, it's screaming. So the fact that they do all of that payoff, that comedic payoff and dramatic payoff too, without even really saying much, other than with a punch and with a hug.
Well, yeah, he knew, but
it says everything about the filmmaking that they do in Major League. It's a reason why it's number 2 on my list. It's up
I
there.
have one more thought. What makes it number 2? We talked about Gina Davis. Obviously, we have her. She's in A League of Their Own. You talk about Susan Sarandon. We did the symmetry of Thelma and Louise and bring Susan Sarandon back into Bull Durham. Rene Russo was so hot in Major League, and that's Tom Berenger's love interest. And she was hot in Lethal Weapons, and I don't know what she's doing nowadays, but talk about the women back then in the 80s that were the hot, the starlets. And then you talked about Madonna starting out her career, and there's a whole generation of these ladies that were so beautiful back then that you and I could appreciate. Now it's the new ones. Now it's I would love to see a remake of Major League or A League of Their Own. And you know how I feel about Sydney Sweeney, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sydney Sweeney could play all the roles, so you Sydney Sweeney and Selena Gomez, and they should all be the new ones in the new baseball movies. Who's the girl that plays Wednesday that's hot right now?
Jenna Ortega.
Beautiful. Yeah, these are the new Rene Russos, Susan Sarandons, Gina Davises, and Madonna. I say to Hollywood, and you have a finger on Hollywood, Dragon movie guy. We need to do remakes of these films and cast those women.
Well, they kind of did, not those actresses, but they did do a League of Their Own streaming show on Hulu last year. So I did not see it, but they did do a remake of A League of Their Own recently, nice. As a streaming show, but not A-list talent for sure. Other interesting note on Rene Russo. This is one of, I'm not saying it's the first, but it is one of her first acting roles after being a big-time Ford model throughout most of the 80s. This is her making that transition from modeling into acting. And, lots of former models have tried to become actresses. Most of them don't have the kind of career that Rene Russo would eventually go on having. But her role, as the romantic interest in this film, she's playing an ex-Olympic swimmer, and she actually has, for being not a big part, she has a great and key role that really does motivate Tom Berenger throughout the entire film, as also the kind of the broken down, soon-to-be former Major League catcher. She's the romantic interest in there that still motivates him, even though she is retired also. He's not chasing around these young women. He's chasing around his former lover who's moved on with her life. And she has a huge impact in a relatively small role in one of her first major acting roles, at least. And it is interesting to note, too, she comes from a highly successful family because it's Rene Russo, as in the very successful directors of the last 2 Avengers movies, the Russo brothers. Right. Well, the Russo brothers have a Russo sister, and that's Rene Russo. So,
I did not know that.
The talent and the success and the hard work that it takes to be a success in Hollywood runs in the Russo family. So, you're right. Rene Russo is great in this film.
One more Dragon movie guy. I'm looking at my list, and I'm thinking of the leading men that I have in my list, and I'm looking at Costner, Berenger, the All-American guys. Okay, Costner in 2 of the films. I have Berenger. Okay. Leading guy, and then you brought up Robert De Niro. I'm shocked. I don't know. You know better. I'm shocked that Clint Eastwood never did a baseball movie, because I think about the Men of Americana, the leading guys back then. Clint could have done a baseball movie in the 70s and got away with it. That's just my out of nowhere type of
Yeah, well, I mean, Clint came up in an era where he was I forget what Western it was, but he was the starring character on a 60s Western before going into film. So he might have been too old to play a young baseball player in the 70s. He would have been like the Crash Davis type character in the 70s by the time because he does the spaghetti westerns in the late 60s with Sergio Leone. So yeah, I don't know if he would have been too old at that point to play a baseball player convincingly. But I'm sure they do all kinds of age reduction in Hollywood. So he probably he's well into his 90s now. He's still alive. He's still working. It's Clint Eastwood. He could play a baseball player now, and probably sell it with CGI running around the bases and like, you know, he's and of course it'd be Clint, so he'd be smoking a cigar in the dugout as Clint at his age, still somehow playing a baseball player. He could do it. But you're right though. Clint Eastwood never played a baseball player, at least as far as I can remember. So.
Nope.
That would be one of the great things to see, because in an alternate reality, is that movie one of the worst films of the 70s or one of the best films of the 70s? Because I could totally see that being an awful film that we go, hey, remember the Clint Eastwood movie that he did back in 1974? Ha ha ha. Or it could be like the baseball film, the baseball movie that gets him an Oscar nomination decades before earning one in the Western from 1991 that he was won for Best Director.
Unforgiven. Phenomenal film.
Yes, Unforgiven. Great film.